Hello, my name is Landon Vold, and I will be presenting the Gracchi Brothers for History 101 W02X. So, the Gracchi Brothers were a pair of siblings who grew up during the height of the Roman Republic. They took to each of their own methods. The brothers took to each of their own methods of social and both political reform, and they attempted to form society they wanted to live in. The statue here is created to represent the brothers. It is named Les Gracchis, pardon my pronunciation, and it was designed by this. I can't pronounce that either. And as we will learn, their main focus revolved around the middle to lower classes within Rome, and their downfall led to Rome's uprising and political violence. Tiberius and Gaius were both born into a wealthy family, and their parents both had irrespective feats and skills. Before I look into the brothers and their parents, however, I would like to provide an important scene of context that describes the realities in Rome during their time of success. The Roman Republic was founded in 509 BCE. It expanded and improved in control throughout the Eastern world, this whole area here. And they soon held control over Italy, which is where the Gracchi brothers will spend most of their time. As a result of a constant barrage of victories, the Roman economy skyrocketed, but control proved to be difficult and had a unique strand in Rome. As they had all of this land, it was hard for them to actually control it as they wanted to. A great example of Roman conquest is the Battle of Corinth. It was in 150 BCE, and the conflict began to rise. A man named Diaius, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, was elected strategos of the Achaean League. A strategos is a leader of an ancient army. He performed a number of political conflicts within the Senate and the League, and it was his efforts that led to the League's detraction from the Roman Senate. And as we jump forward to 146 BCE, we can see that through his collection of taxes, aka levies at the time, the strategos declared war on the Republic. Eventually, this man, Cratolus, was elected, but he eventually died, putting him back in power, and he began to fight the Republic. But eventually he lost, as the Rome had an advantage of infantry and cavalry both. Rome actually had 23,000 infantry compared to his 13,000, as well as 3,000 compared to his 1,000 cavalry. But through the battle, Corinth was destroyed and gave Rome a victory, resulting in wealth, as I previously discussed. But this is just one example. There are many and countless examples of Roman victory during this time, as we can go back to this. They had tons of territory, so they had a lot of land and victories they experienced. As I said, this is just one example, and there's many more. And this picture is actually from the League. And this is just a little picture and a finding of the coin from the time. The newfound treasure from the various conquests funneled to the rich population of Rome and left the common people behind, specifically the returning soldiers who had fought so hard to gain control and wealth for Rome. As they returned, they had owned farms back at home, but they were gone much longer than they had expected, so they lost out on a huge profit from their cultivated land that they missed out on. A portion of these people took to the decision of selling their land to the rich as a result of the economic struggle. In summary to this context of the Republic, the poor suffered while the rich thrived. Before I speak on the elder brother, Tiberius, I would like to finalize my context by speaking on their parents, Tiberius Gracchus the elder and Cornelia Scipio Africana. The former's life spanned from 217 to 154 BCE, the latter living from 195 to 115 BCE. This picture on the left is just a generic representation of a Roman family, not the Gracchans specifically. I just thought it gave a little good image to put in your head. Gracchus the Elder was a respected member of the wealthy in Rome. A couple highlights of his life consist of him being a censor, tribune of the plebe, and two-time consul. For his consul, he was elected in 177 and 163 BCE. During his life, a man named Scipio Africanus was tribune and began to face political struggles in the East. Gracchus the Elder made the decision to take sides with Scipio, and over time he slowly gained his respect. As a reward, Scipio allowed Gracchus the Elder to marry one of his daughters, Cornelius. At the time of this marriage, the elder was 48 years old, while Cornelius was only 18. This age difference alone made the marriage seem odd, but the weirder part was that they actually cared for each other, and this was not common for marriages between wealthy couples during this time. As time went on, the couple had children together. These included Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. Education was a focus in their home. Knowledge proved as the leading focus within their family. Just as Tiberius had turned 14, the year was 154 BCE, Gracchus the Elder had died. Gaius was also born the same year. Since the main figurehead of the house had passed on, Cornelia took hold of the home and their children's education. Cornelia spent most of her remaining lifetime educating her sons to the best of her ability, and she tried to shape them to the men that would represent the Gracchian name. As we will learn, that representation might not be ideal for what she was looking forward to. So now that my context is actually provided, I'm going to speak on the Gracchi brothers themselves. The first being Tiberius Gracchi. Tiberius Gracchus was born in 163 BCE, and as we previously learned, his parents were Tiberius Gracchus the Elder and Cornelia Africanus. Tiberius' childhood was nothing special for the time. Tiberius grew up in a well-respected family, and he was wealthy, so his hardships were not extremely awful. As he grew up, along with his siblings, education was a focus, and knowledge provided an important aspect of his life. His mother, Cornelia, was his main educator, and as I previously stated, by the time he was 14, his father had died, so his education and livelihood was fully taken over by his mother. Tiberius' career is widely considered to have started in Carthage. The year was 147 BCE as the Third Punic War raged on. The Roman general at the time was Scipio Aemilianus, and just so happened to be Tiberius' brother-in-law. As a result of Tiberius' respect and relationship with him, he served under him during the war. An interesting side note is Scipio Aemilianus would later become Tiberius' uncle as a result of adoption. Tiberius is believed to be the first man of Rome who made his way over Carthage's wall as they sulked in defeat to the Roman Republic. In reaction and appreciation for his efforts, his return home was coupled with his marriage to Appius Claudius Pulcher's daughter, Claudia. Pulcher was a well-known politician in Rome and was a consul in 143 BCE. Years passed, and in 137 BCE, Tiberius became quaestor, a public official in Rome. He resided in Spain and served under the consul Gaius Mancinius. Trouble in Numantia had been going on for almost a decade now, so Tiberius made his efforts to subside the conflict. Tiberius' father was able to reach peace in the years past, so the Gracchian name was a well-respected thing in the area. He proved successful in his peace-reaching efforts and struck a deal that would assist more than 30,000 soldiers. Unfortunately, after informing the Senate of his successful deal, they chose to reject the treaty. They scoffed at the negotiation slander to the Roman principle, and Mancinius was kicked from his office as a result. The curious part of this internal conflict is the Senate's rejection was heavily pushed and supported by Scipio Aemilianus, who was his brother-in-law. Tiberius' relation with his political allies, if you can call them that, considering their past conflicts, grew distant. He wasn't a patrician nor a plebeian, but stood in the gray area between the two. He came to be indirectly casted out from his upper-class patricians, which included his political co-workers. He understood the ramifications this would have on his governmental career, so he made a decision to start focusing on the people of Rome to be the backbone of his political reforms. This was revolutionary for the time, and by focusing on the people for support, he had a second-hand impact on Rome's political change. This impact is exemplified by the growing political parties of Optimates and Populares. The Optimates were made up of Rome's nobility. Their political wish was for the power to be kept within the Senate. This illustration on the right is a representation of the Optimates within Rome, while this illustration on the left shows an example of what a common person would look like within Rome. These common people were considered the Populares. They had an opposite view on politics, as they looked for the power in Rome to shift to the people. Their view was driven by the common people's problems within Rome, such as their farms being bought by the wealthy and jobs being taken away by the many slaves within Rome. Tiberius paid attention to this and was in the loop for the shift in political power, so he took advantage of these problems, or to him, opportunities, for his political success. Tiberius is most known for his contribution to land reforms, but before I touch on his efforts, I want to provide an image for the reality in Rome. The law stated that a single person was forbidden to own more than 500 jugera. Jugera? You may be curious to what this term means. Well, an jugera was a unit used throughout Rome that was equivalent to approximately 14,000 square feet. There is a huge rabbit hole of information here, an example being heredium, which is 2 jugera, equivalent to 28,000 square feet, but I won't dive into it. Overall, this bit of info was just a sidebar of information that gave me a good image of the Roman reality, so I just wanted to add it here. Now that the context of jugera is provided, I will go back to the main point. As Tiberius paid attention to the common people, he noticed a growing problem that the wealthy in Rome held the majority of Rome's power. This was perfectly shown as he disregarded a specific bit of Roman law. This law in question expressed that one person was not able to own more than 500 jugera. As the wealthy of Rome largely ignored this rule, Tiberius made his efforts to establish and cement it into their lives. He proposed a lex agraria, which stated that any and all land possessed beyond the pre-established 500 jugera would be given back to the government and be relocated among Roman farmers. Among Rome's common people, the land reform was heavily supported, but the wealthy landowners, many of which were in the Senate, opposed the idea. Fortunately for Tiberius, according to law, he did not need approval from the Senate themselves. He just needed the people to carry his wishes out. So, to gather support, he entered the city and spoke to his spectators with calmness. His intelligent words enveloped the audience. He stated, "The wild beasts that roam Italy have, every one of them, a cave or lair to lurk in, while the men who fight and die for Italy enjoy the common air and light, but nothing else. Houseless and homeless, they wander about with their wives and children. It is with lying lips that their commanders exhort the soldiers to fight battles to protect shrines from the enemy. But they fight and die in support of others in wealth and luxury. Though they are styled as masters of the world, they have not a single clod of earth to call their own." This last sentence I'm going to restate because it summarizes Tiberius's whole thought on this. Though they are styled as masters of the world, they have not a single clod of earth to call their own. Tiberius took advantage of his poetic manner in speaking to round up the people in support of him. Just as Tiberius exploited the Roman law by going to the people for his support, the law was subsequently exploited by a fellow tribune, Marcus Octavius. Octavius was in direct disagreement with Tiberius's wishes and land reform, so to put a stop to it, he personally vetoed Tiberius's lex agraria proposal. This illustration here is not directly correlated with this, but it kind of represents Octavius over here going against Tiberius's reforms. As expected, Tiberius did not appreciate the opposition, as Octavius was the sole person blocking Tiberius from his goal, so he made attempts to stray Octavius away. Tiberius tried to bribe and threat him, but he had no success. Eventually, Tiberius took to the people once again to carry his wishes out. Rather than changing Octavius's ideas, he would instead remove him altogether. Tiberius proposed that the assembly vote on removing Octavius from office. The assembly agreed to this, resulting in Octavius's removal, thus making his vetoes inconsequential. The lex agraria now passed with flying colors of support and was in effect. We can notice a pattern of Tiberius's reliance on the people, just as I stated before, and a new method of success was being exploited by him. He used the people to his advantage, and as we will soon learn, this had a longing effect on the Republic. Following the passing of a lex agraria, it was determined to be overseen by Tiberius, his younger brother Gaius, and Appius Claudius. We will be looking at Gaius in a little bit here. The lex agraria had worked just as Tiberius had wished, but was put at a halt with a lack of money backing it up. The amount of coinage issued for this proposal was just enough for the daily expenses, but not enough for it to make a worthwhile change. The unfortunate reality was saved in the same year as a fortune was left for Rome. King Attalus III had died, leaving his kingdom's wealth in his tracks. The picture here is featured is a painting of a wealthy king. It is not King Attalus, but is an image that I think fits pretty good in the situation. Tiberius took advantage of this death and proposed that a portion of the money left behind would be used for his land distribution. He stated that the people deserved the wealth left by the king, but this went against the Senate's wishes. This allowed Tiberius to carry out the lex agraria as he wanted, but it created an even bigger conflict between Tiberius and the Senate. As the conflict became hotter, meaningless policies arose in the heated political battle between the two, some of which had actual meaning while others were just for the opposers' inconvenience. The Senate eventually took to patience as its tool for victory, as Tiberius' time in office was soon to expire. But as I finish Tiberius' story, we will learn that it was not so simple. As the Senate and Tiberius continued to clash, he began to understand that the issues were not going to end. So he took to an outlandish idea of running for re-election. The Senate was outraged, as this was not practiced for hundreds of years and was deemed illegal. Tiberius had been going against them for far too long. He had used the assembly to pass a lex agraria, used the people to dispose of Marcus Octavius from tribune, used the death of King Attalus III for his own means, and now ran for re-election in spite of the typical tradition. This final nail in Tiberius' coffin was enough for the Senate to take action. With the backing of the enraged Marcus Octavius, the Senate took their chance on election day. Within the Senate was a man named Scipio Nasica, who led a mob against Tiberius. He stated, "Let those who save our country follow me." This perspective is interesting, as he, along with the majority of the Senate, believed Tiberius' new methods of power to be against the traditional ways and against Roman tradition. As a result of this mob, an eruption of violence occurred between Scipio's people and Tiberius' followers. In the end, hundreds died, including Tiberius. The death of Tiberius is occasionally credited as Rome's beginning in political murders and warfare, as following his death, the Senate created a commission that allowed them to hand out capital punishments in an effort to capture the remaining Gracchian supporters. As we took the time to observe Tiberius's life, we learned that he was a controversial figure among Rome, but his little brother, Gaius Gracchus, would represent reform even more, becoming even more debated. Gaius Gracchus was born in 154 BCE. During the same year, his father, Gracchus the Elder, had died, and his brother Tiberius had turned 14. So unlike Tiberius's chance of knowing his father, Gaius would grow up without his dad and left his mother Cornelia to raise him. Just like his siblings, including Tiberius, education was a focus in his childhood. While growing up, Gaius put off his future run for office, but the Gracchian name's pressure would make him cave on his plans. That being said, he would not partake in anything major that would be worthy of historical trace until he was around 28 years old in 126 BCE. When you look at Tiberius and Gaius as a pair, they are completely opposites of each other. Tiberius strived for political greatness and used his captivating words and intellectual thoughts to capture his audience, while Gaius was not interested in politics in comparison to Tiberius throughout his early age, and rather than staying calm during speech, he took to energetic passion to bring his audience together. When you look at these differences alone, we can see that the Gracchi brothers held many differences, but as we travel through Gaius' life, we will understand that despite their personal contrasts, their political aspirations had similar effects on the Roman Republic. At the time of Tiberius' death, 133 BCE, Gaius was only 21. As I stated before, Gaius did not begin his political impact until around 28, so there was a grace period in Roman history that lacked any Gracchian influence. I say there was no Gracchian influence, but it is ironic. Despite Tiberius' death, many of his reforms lived on and still pained the Senate. So, in consequence to his death, they looked towards unwinding his many achievements. Their time of grace was put to an end, however, in 126 BCE. Gaius was quaestor, and through lot placed in Sardinia under the consul Lucius Orestes. Lot means by a manner of complete randomness. If you take a look at this map, you may notice that Sardinia is located far away from Rome's main piece of land. This seems random, but it was an indirect attempt by the Senate to keep Gaius away from the main political action in Rome. Gaius would have a chance to leave Sardinia, but by law, officers who served under consuls, in this case Gaius serving under Orestes, had to stay with them wherever they served. The Senate understood this practice, so by the time Orestes faced re-election, the Senate took a vote that kept him back in Sardinia. This kept Gaius in Sardinia for another year, and by the time his year expired, the Senate pledged to do the same, but Gaius took notice and did not appreciate the seemingly soulless attack. Gaius exclaimed to be leaving the island of Sardinia, which went against Roman tradition. This should be noted as a direct comparison to Tiberius' political methods and going against tradition during his run for re-election. In response to Gaius abandoning his post, he was charged with abandoning his commander. Gaius would not go down without a fight and used his witty and passionate expertise in speech to reject his allegations. He stated that while others exploited the commoners, he made his efforts towards improving their lives. The ordeal ended in the charges against him being dropped. Gaius soon became beloved by the people of Rome, and he was elected tribune of the plebs in 123 BCE, just as his father and brother had been before him. Gaius had first-hand experience of Tiberius' impact on society, and he wanted to do the same. Throughout Gaius' time in political control, he passed many reforms that impacted almost every aspect of Roman life. One of the first things Gaius set out to do was pass a law that made it illegal to run for tribune if you were once voted out by the assembly. Gaius proposed this law for two main reasons, the first being his philosophy for the people to begin holding the power, just as Tiberius had done in his lifetime. The second reason being that Gaius was making an attempt to directly attack Marcus Octavius, who was Tiberius' nemesis years prior. The law did not go through, though, as his mother Cornelius asked him to withdraw the bill, and he did. The painting I have featured here is called Fantasy View of the Roman Forum, and is by Victor Jean Nicole, who presided in Paris during the late 18th century and gives a unique perspective on the Roman daily life. On top of this slightly controversial law, he proposed a law that deemed it illegal to give out capital punishments without approval from the assembly. This was another effort of him to right the wrongs of his family, or more specifically Tiberius, as the Senate went after his followers after he died. The law went into action and accomplished his intentions, and lots of senators were now criminals for going after various followers of Tiberius. These people included a man named Popules, who rather than being tried, he chose to exile himself. This proved the reality of Gaius' attack on the Senate, continuing his apparent family tradition. Over his time as tribune, he passed differing bills and laws, ultimately having an effect on almost all aspects of Roman life. Where Tiberius stopped at his land reforms, the most known portion of his additions to Rome, Gaius continued. He took towards laws that would give him support from every financial class throughout Rome. The painting featured here is named Roman Interior, and it gives you a great image of the poorer classes of Rome. When looking at the poor population of Rome, Gaius spent the least amount of time in effect here, but the most notable impact he had was his reinforcing of the Lex Agraria's financial stability, as over the recent years it slowed down so much that it hadn't had as much as an impact as the years prior. With it recommissioned, it went back to the people and made its one big land reform occur once again. The poor people of Rome were affected by Gaius, but when you look at the Publicani throughout Rome, you can see how he spent most of his processes. The Publicani in Rome were contractors who spent their time focusing on Rome's army and established building contracts throughout the lands. Gaius made a tremendous impact on these people by attempting to make new colonies throughout Italy. Along with these colonies, he brainstormed roads that connected these various lands. It is an important note that these roads were built with excellent quality and were to be considered a huge benefit to the surrounding area. This is a picture taken of an ancient road in Timgad, and is located in the Ares Mountain in present-day Algeria, and gives a good idea to what the roads would have looked like. With these changes, or should be considered reforms, the Publicani were given new processes to focus their time on, resulting in profit being made otherwise impossible without Gaius's help. The final aspect of his reforms were an attempt to gather support from Rome's middle to lower class. I will provide two examples of his reforms that represent his impact to the common people perfectly, the first being his influence on the grains market. Rome had a heavy reliance on grain, which provided both an economic source as well as food for their population. They received most of this grain from places like North Africa, Sicily, and Sardinia, but droughts and plagues of locusts had an effect on them. Droughts had an effect on most grain providers, while the locusts were specific to mostly Africa, but both had swept the countries providing the grain. These problems resulted in a shortage of grain, thus increasing the prices of the grain as the numerous grain sellers in Rome took advantage of the crisis. The rising prices in grain forced Rome's population to suffer, but Gaius noticed the problem and used it to his advantage. He fixed the problem by establishing a price cap on the grain, which moved the crisis away from the citizens to Rome itself. This price manipulation may not seem like a big deal, but in reality it was a complete flip in the traditional market. Gaius created a new market reality that put the country at risk, but temporarily helped the people. The second major reform, or could be considered multiple reforms, were his military ones. Gaius understood the struggles the soldiers went through as they conquered more and more land. Their treatment had worsened. He witnessed the underwhelming realities in Sardinia specifically, as the soldiers had been living in cold weather, taking a toll on their morale. So he single-handedly altered the way the army would be treated. He changed the age limit at which one could be drafted into the military to 17, as well as forced proper clothing to be provided to the soldiers. When we look back at Tiberius' time as tribune, his reign in politics fell when he announced his running for a second term. At the time it was so outrageous that his announcement resulted to his murder. But apparently a difference in no less than 11 years can flip the whole political culture upside down. As Gaius' first term as tribune came to an end, he had accumulated a profound amount of support. As re-election rolled around, he began to support his friend, Marcus Fulvius Flaccus, during his run at re-election. Fulvius' run was odd for his time, as he was consul in 125 BCE, just 3 years prior, and rather than giving up his time in political office, he ran for a lower part of the hierarchy, tribune. After the people had voted, the ballots were read, and the winners were established. But to Gaius' surprise, his name was announced. Despite him not running, he had won. There is a possibility that Gaius had planned this all along, but it is not 100% known in our history. Now that his reality was a second term as tribune, he continued on his path to the reforms. Quickly, he decided to make his imprint on the topic of Italian citizenship. Gaius and his newfound friend Marcus Fulvius both supported this cause. Fulvius had a spring of efforts when he was consul. Gaius did not sit around and wait for others to make a change, so he proposed a bill that would be an effort at providing citizenship to these Italians. His bill stated that everyone who held Latin rights would receive Roman citizenship, and all Italian would also receive these Latin rights. After declaring his bill, the Senate was in overwhelming opposition and it was struck down. This opposition stemmed from several reasons, including Italian citizenship being a heavy controversial topic during this time. The other reason being is if the bill was passed, the new citizens would all keep loyal to Gaius, and other people who supported their cause, such as Fulvius. As the bill was stricken down, Gaius traveled overseas and personally saw his colonialization projects in action. Gaius traveled to Carthage, the location of one of his previous projects. He observed in efforts to make sure his plans were being carried through as he saw fit. Gaius spent his time here and everything seemed to be going smoothly, but when Gaius returned to the mainland, he was struck by the reality that while he was gone, his influence had reduced. Some of his past allies had switched sides and were now against him, and many of his former reforms were now under the threat of repeal. At the fresh state of disarray, Gaius planned the unthinkable. Rather than facing his new challenges with optimism, he decided to fatally run for a third term. Despite the past reality of Tiberius, Gaius would rather choose dangerous re-election than suffer the consequences of his past. In spite of his previous impacts on Roman life, his support bordered complete invisibility. Gaius was aware of this reality and spent all of his time buried in his campaign for re-election. His life now consisted of what could be considered his fight for survival. He surrounded himself in his efforts and moved to a slum within Rome. He is even rumored to have removed seats presiding in a gladiator stadium which blocked the view of peasants. But despite his extraordinary endeavors, he lost his campaign. The year was 121 BCE. A fresh life for Gaius began as he now lived without political influence. A time of confusion and anger encompassed Gaius as his many reforms were being bombarded with attempts of removal. A new consul was elected, Lucius Opimius. Opimius spent a considerable amount of time following the trend and attacked Gaius's reforms along with mainly the Senate. It seemed as if the world had turned against Gaius in the span of less than 1 year. He did his best to take the constant battering of political attacks to the head, but his final cap of self-control left his body as his efforts in Carthage, his fresh colony, had been swept under the rug and completely discarded. A new and final chapter had begun in Gaius's life, his revenge on his opposition. He worked with his seemingly only friend, Marcus Fulvius, and went against the Roman power. The two set up a demonstration in an effort to bring public awareness to their attacks, but a violence arose that would lead to their demise. As a crowd of supporters filled the audience, a sole servant of the consul, Opimius, entered the crowd. This man worked his way through the crowd in a relative peacefulness, but was met directly by Styluses, and murdered on the spot by Gaius's followers. This insane murder was responded to with a charge of treason aimed directly again at Gaius and Fulvius. This gave the pair only one choice, their run for freedom. They understood that if they were caught and charged, they would be put to death. Fulvius was the first to meet his demise as he was caught with his children and killed. Gaius was able to run longer but didn't find a different fate. He is believed to have committed suicide with the help of one of his slaves in 121 BCE. As Gaius was dead, his many followers were arrested and put to death in similar fashion to his elder brother. This ending may seem abrupt, but it is reality. The political aspirations of these two young men, Gaius and Tiberius Gracchus, were deemed too extravagant by the Roman Republic and were met with death, leaving their phenomenal legacy of Roman reform behind in their tracks. Although neither of the two lived to see their reforms make political change in their society, their efforts led to an uprising of political violence. They are often referred to as starting the trend of violence being used as a political tool in Rome. It may seem crazy that two brothers who focus their efforts in reforms are synonymous with Rome's rise in political violence, but their crazed ways were met with heavy opposition and resulted in blood being shed. So that about sums up the lives of Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. I found it really entertaining as I researched these two because they had just such a profound impact in just a little amount of time. Their impact was so much that they were even murdered for it. The sources I used varied from books and websites. Mostly books, but websites allowed me to go more deep on specific topics, such as the measurements. As you look at this one down here, it gave me a lot of information on the measurements used in Rome, and gave me a great context at Tiberius and his land reforms. This last one here is pretty interesting. I didn't read a whole bunch of it, but the information that it gave me was a lot of information that is pretty generic to the time. It wasn't necessarily Tiberius and Gaius, but it gave awesome context to the actual buildings and reality of the Republic with the people and the leaders of it. But overall, like I said, the books gave me most of the information while the websites gave me specific information. And here are my images. This isn't every single one, but it's the more historic paintings. Paintings and statues and stuff like that. But overall, yeah, that concludes my presentation. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned a little bit about the Gaius brothers.